CEOs and top level leaders, regardless of the size of your business, you have to figure out what you believe. If you believe in inclusion, then you have got to be able to say that to your organization. You can't hide. You can't pretend like this is something taboo that can't be talked about. You have got to be overt in saying, we want all employees to have a great experience here, and I'm holding myself and everybody else in this organization responsible for that.
Hello, Profit First entrepreneurs and thought leaders. I am so excited today because we have a very special topic as well as a very special guest. I have with us today Dr. Gena Cox, and Dr. Gena Cox has many, many years of experience, decades long actually of experience with some of the largest companies in America. And she particularly specializes in creating workplace inclusion or environments of workplace of inclusion. And what Dr. Cox has done is she has harnessed her experience with organizational psychology, as well as her executive coach insights and her understanding of the C-suite dynamics to really create this amazing book called Leading Inclusion. And this is such an important topic today. You know, I hear so many entrepreneurs tell me that they have a hard time finding people, right? And the bigger thing is they have a hard time keeping people. And in this particular decade, this particular age, if people do not feel welcome, they do not feel included or part of your workforce, even though they're physically present, they're not going to stay. And so today I'm so excited because Dr. Cox and I, we're going to have that conversation about leading inclusion, making sure that all your employees actually feel part of the team. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Cox to our talk. Hey, Dr. Cox, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I am so excited. It's great to be with you, Susanne. And I have this sense that I know your audience well. Even though I haven't met the individuals, I've heard you talk so much about them over the months. It's just a pleasure to be with you.
You know, we're excited to have you too. And I want to congratulate you on the launch of your book this week. You know, this is an amazing piece of art that you are putting into the world, and it's going to make a huge difference really on building environments where everybody feel welcome.
I really hope so, because, you know, Susanne, a book is a tool. In my case, it's a tool because I'm one of those people who really believes that we've got to do whatever we can to bring people together. And this is my little contribution to that. And so, you know, I just hope that everyone who listens to this conversation knows that the main point that I would want them to remember by the end of this call is that all of us can do something to make the world better.
Definitely. So, Dr. Cox, I am always curious about what prompted authors to write books, especially books that are of a sensitive nature like this. And if you don't mind just giving us a little background behind Leading Inclusion and what brought you to writing this book, that would be great.
Oh, absolutely. So the short answer is that in the spring of 2020, I was on the verge of something, and it came about because at the beginning of the year, Ahmaud Arbery had been killed, and I had seen that video and it traumatized me. It didn't even seem real. But then a couple months later, Breonna Taylor was killed, and she could have been my daughter. When I would see the photographs, that was the one thing, the emotion that kept coming out of me was, how do I protect somebody who looks like her, right? That's how I felt about it. In May, when George Floyd was killed, by that point, like I said, I was a basket case, because here I am sitting at home and I'm watching this and I'm thinking, what can I do to be helpful? This is insanity. It can't continue. And I said, you know what, Gina, you're going to have to put your money where your mouth is. You can't be a fake, a fraud, and a phony anymore, meaning you observe this stuff and you stay in the background and pretend like it's not happening. And I decided to take everything that I had ever been trained and my own personal experiences, which were related, and put together something to help leaders understand this issue, because I recognized that that was the gap in our country where we have people who don't understand one another. They don't value one another. They don't even see one another, is when you can have situations like that. And in the workplace, I was seeing some of that same behavior in my own consulting world. And I thought, this is it. This is what I need to do.
Definitely an important piece that's going out there. Definitely with that. You know, I can tell you in my work experience, you know, there have been times where, you know, I felt that sitting in rooms being ignored, you know, where everyone got their opinion out there. And maybe it was being young at the time, but, you know, just overlooked at times. And so, you know, this is definitely an important topic that we're having. And first of all, you know, I like to dig a little bit into the psychology, right? Because when we talk about leading inclusion, this book particularly is about the corporate world and creating an environment where people feel included in your company, right? Because if you want your employees to stay, right, you're going to need them to feel part of a team, because reality is you can get a job anywhere, right? Anywhere, especially in an environment where the grocery stores are starting to pay $15 an hour. nobody needs to work for anybody, right?
Mhm.
And so this becomes a very important topic with being able to retain your talent. Especially, we all know it's like almost twice somebody's salary to recruit somebody and to train, especially if you're using a recruiter. We're talking about at least
Absolutely.
25%. So retention is not a joke. And so this is really an important concept here. So let's talk about it first of all. Why is this topic needed? Why are people not feeling included in the corporate world?
Well, sometimes people aren't feeling included, mostly because of their relationship with their immediate manager. I use a term that I call a designated hitter leader or designated hitter manager because everybody deserves to have at least one person in an organization, even a small organization, that has their back. And people expect that that person will be their manager. But when I did some research in 2020, where I talked to 20 corporate leaders, and then I did a survey of about 500 working women, 150 of whom were Black women, what I discovered was that the leader said, we don't necessarily want to deal with diversity and inclusion issues because we don't know if it belongs on our plate. We don't want to alienate our friends and our colleagues who don't agree that we should be dealing with this. And then the last thing they said, they were being very honest, is that we don't really even understand what it is that people of color or people who are LGBTQ plus or whatever, what do they really want from us? We're really not sure. Then when I looked at the survey data from the women, the Black women, what they said was very clear. They said, oh, we know that. That's not any surprise. We know this is how our managers and leaders behave because they avoid us. Literally, they don't even sometimes want to make eye contact with us. They don't include us. So that's no big surprise. However, the big surprise for me was when they said, and we interpret that as disrespect for our circumstances and our needs in their organization. And that was when I had my real epiphany, Susanne, and I started to talk about this respect first model. Because what I realize is a lot of people don't stay in organizations because they don't feel respected, especially by their immediate supervisor or manager.
Oh, yeah. That immediate supervisor that you put there, that immediate manager, that is your company.
Yes.
If they don't do a job of making your people feel seen or heard, that is the reflection of their company. They're going to go, I don't like that company. They don't value our contribution. So you got to be really careful about who you put into that
Yeah.
place.
And Susanne, I'll say one more thing very quickly because you were talking about the great resignation and so on. Candidates for jobs can sense this in 2 seconds. So while you're thinking about what you do as manager or as a recruiter or as the entry point for somebody into an organization, just be aware that the candidates are seeing everything you do, and they're not just judging you on the formal interview situation. They're watching everything. So when they sense this disrespect, it might even be before the interview.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Like, be careful what you said on a podcast. They're like, yeah, they don't like people that are different than them. You got to
Yeah.
be definitely careful about that. I like that you talk about, particularly the CEO, and CEOs can change America. Let's
Mhm.
talk about that. I know that's like chapter 1 of your book. Let's talk about why is it so important that CEOs embrace inclusion, and why is it important that it's led from a top initiative versus a bottom up, meaning that your people are leading this initiative.
Yeah, absolutely, Suzanne. So the truth is, in the 1960s, civil rights legislation was passed at the federal level that mandated that any organization with 100 employees or more would report these demographics about so-called protected groups, race, gender, to some degree, sexual orientation and disability and so on. And the expectation was that what would magically happen was that organizations would then create these inclusive environments, and then eventually the problem would go away. Well, here we are 60 something years later, and what we discovered is that very little progress has been made. And then if you go to May of 2020, after George Floyd was killed, organizations did start to pay more attention. But even in those 2 years, there's been very little progress. So why has there been little progress? Because in most cases, these efforts have not been strategic. They've been what I call ad hoc, random. They've been sort of off to the side. But what we really need is to have a strategic view or vision led from the top of the organization, because as you and I both know, people in organizations don't do things unless they feel they're required to do them by the people above them. And so when the C-suite is not involved or isn't guiding this effort, then they delegate these responsibilities to people and say, here, take this box and fix it. And the people to whom they give the box, they don't give them power, they don't give them money or influence to really solve the problems. Those people don't get respect either. So it's got to be led from the top so it can be strategic, so you can figure out what success looks like at the end so that employees can see the change across whatever the organization is. And also because if the people at the top don't believe in this, the way that they behave, reveals that every day. They have got to model the way.
Definitely. It has to be a top down initiative with that. What are some things that CEOs can do in order to begin to create an environment of inclusion?
Well, as I said before, I think that CEOs and top level leaders, regardless of the size of your business, you have to figure out what you believe. If you believe in inclusion, then you have got to be able to say that to your organization. You can't hide. You can't pretend like this is something taboo that can't be talked about. You have got to be overt in saying, we want all employees to have a great experience here. And I'm holding myself and everybody else in this organization responsible for that. So that's the first thing all leaders must do. Beyond that, though, you've got to figure out what it is that your managers are doing. Because a lot of organizations put people in managerial roles because they're strong technically at something. Nothing wrong with that. But you've got to make sure you're training and coaching your managers, because my rule is if they're going to interact with another human, then they better be trained to do that. Just as if they're going to interact with your financials, you wouldn't just let any old person do that. You have to train people to interact with humans. Because as we said before, the primary driver of whether I will stay or leave the organization is going to be that relationship. So leaders, you need to know what's going on in your organizations. You need to set the tone from the top. And then the last thing I'll mention is that in the last couple of years, especially, I noticed a lot of organizations said, let's hire more people, from different ethnic groups or whatever variation they were interested in. That's a good thing, right? I don't have an argument with that. But when you create a more diverse workforce, but you haven't created an inclusive culture, when those people show up, it feels like being invited to a dinner party where there's no place setting for you, right? It's like, I'm here, but did they really want me here? And I hear a lot about those kinds of situations. So you've got to do your pre-work before you do your diversity work.
I love that. I'm curious how many people don't realize that they have a problem with inclusion. Like I've talked to many entrepreneurs and they're like, oh yeah, we have a diverse environment. I'm like, yeah, you got one, one out of 10. Or if I have that. I mean, first of all, how do you know if you have an environment where your team feels included? How do you know that? How do you measure it?
So I've been in many situations where I have been the first, the few, the only, the one. And I have been in situations like that and still felt included sometimes. In other words, sometimes your organization is not as diverse as you want it to be. Maybe you're working on that. But you can still start building an inclusive environment, because inclusion has a lot to do with respect for people being heard and seen and feeling empowered. Everybody, anybody, right? So you need to understand that you have to have an environment where individuals feel that way, and you're the one that's going to make that decision about if that's how it is. When you have managers that don't behave that way, you have to find some way to discipline them, and ideally not have them leading people. And if they still can't work it out, maybe they need to leave your organization. That's the ultimate test. But the thing about inclusion is that I know that, especially in the last couple of years, we think a lot about it from the perspective of race and so on. But I can tell you that when I have been in organizations, even if they weren't diverse, there were still environments where I felt like somebody was hearing my voice and someone wanted to sort of support me in some way. So the other things that leaders should make sure are happening is that you should look and ask yourself, why is it that we have everybody that is in certain kinds of jobs all look the same? Or you should ask yourself, why is it that all of our people are hired through, employee referral, where Susie keeps referring her cousins, and so everybody comes in is the same person. I mean, that's okay when you're starting your business. There's nothing wrong with that. But as you grow a business, you got to be really careful about that. I think another thing that leaders really need to think about and watch out for is how there's no gentle way to put this, but don't just put certain kinds of people in the roles that either have the client facing opportunity or make the most money, or maybe in sales, for example. I see a lot where organizations will then hire people who vary, but they'll put them sort of like they'll hide them away in a job where they can't be seen. They can't have influence. Nobody asks, there are just so many things that one can do if you stop and think about it to make things feel like everybody belongs here.
Definitely. Like we've all seen the people of color just in the mailroom, right? That's not inclusion, right? It's really making sure that people have opportunities in every level of your organization and implementing mentoring for that to happen with that. And, my experience is it's just like you said, Gina, it's even the small things, right? Just, you could be the only one, but still feel part of the team. I love how you share that. And it comes down to being a good person. When you see somebody, you smile at them, especially if you're a manager, you'd be surprised. I remember when a few years ago with our firm, like I had a team member get upset with me because I didn't say goodbye as I was leaving. And they were like, is she mad at anger? I was like, no, I'm just in a hurry to get to the daycare because, they started charging me $1
Yes.
a minute. But, because you're from the top down and they're walking by and you specifically didn't say hi or goodbye, they took it personally. And just being cognizant that you have that influence, even if you don't know that person, if you're not thinking about that, you've got 50 other things running through your mind, to just stop and say hello, or you don't even stop, just say hello and smile and walk around. But that makes that person feel included with that, not just the person that but, everybody, making everybody feel that way.
Yeah. I have to tell you a quick story that someone shared with me just yesterday. This lady's son was going off to college in a new place, and she went with him, and he was having his first, apartment or something like that. And she was really concerned and she was worried for him. But they walked into the place, into the dorm or apartment or whatever it was, and there was a little note. The note was from whoever is in charge of setting the stuff up. And he opened up the note and it said, so let's say his name is Paul. It says, "Welcome, Paul. This is the place where you're going to belong for the next year or two," whatever. It was just a little note. It was not a big deal. But her son immediately was like, ah. And then she was immediately like, ah. And so what she was sharing with me and what is relevant here is that sometimes it's all those little things that make the biggest difference. If you're interviewing somebody, make sure you're on time. If you're interviewing someone, make sure you know their name. Make sure you ask them some room to talk in the conversation. Ask them, what's on their mind. Don't just make it all about you. If you hired somebody and they show up on the first day, somebody better be there with a smiling face to greet them, or at least to say, "We're so glad you're here." I mean, these are little things that make a huge difference in terms of retaining your employees.
Oh, yeah. And I think especially when it comes to marginalized groups, right?
Yeah.
We unfortunately have been used to being put on the parameters, like the sidelines or walk past. And, when you're going into an interview, if you're from a marginalized group, you're looking for those, "I told you so" moments, right?
Yes.
And so you really have to focus on being just a good human, when you're talking to somebody.
That's right. Yeah. And, for all of us who, for me as a Black woman in America, I have trained myself to be very observant, or at least you develop the skill. But I've also trained myself not to respond to everything I see, because if I responded to every slight that I experience on any given day in the public arena, I would be fighting every day. So instead, I put my energy into thinking, you know what? My revenge, if you wanted to call it that, is just to keep growing, getting better, and being able to smile every day. I think that's the best revenge. And so I say that to people who are listening too, who might look like me and who might say, sometimes it's really a burden. It is a burden. But what you have to have is something inside of you that lights you up, and that you put your energy on that. And then all of this other stuff, let it fall away. Do not bring it into your heart, your pores, your wherever it goes. Don't let it get into your body. You got to keep it away from you.
Definitely very good advice on that one. As the world is changing,
Yes.
we all need to develop a little bit thicker skin with that. One of the things that I always get is, especially when it comes to statistics, is we can't find enough talented people that are diversity. It's something that people will often say, especially if they get into the government contracting arena and they're looking for a sub or that type of thing. You'll hear that a lot. Dr. Cox, what are your thoughts on that?
So first of all, it's a double-edged sword, and some of what I'll say might surprise you. So let's just say the population of the United States, and let's just say 13% of the population of the United States is Black or of Black African descent. That number is just what it is. So if you are trying to find something, you have to make sure you're looking in the pool where the people are. And so if the only place you're looking is all your familiar places, the only thing you're only going to ever be seeing the group that doesn't include that 13% if you're not accustomed to dealing with that 13%. So you probably have to go outside of your normal methods and paths and relationships to find what you're looking for. Here's the other thing, though. Since we have been excluded for so long from access to the training that could get us ready for a lot of opportunities, organizations are finally recognizing that sometimes now they have got to put the effort into training and developing people that they previously overlooked. When I worked at IBM, I really loved a program that still exists called P-Tech, letter P and TECH. So years ago, what IBM figured out was that if they only hired bachelor's degree engineers, that number one, they would never have enough engineers to innovate as quickly as they wanted to. And number two, they would never have a diverse pool of engineers. They created a whole program called P-Tech where you could get some of this training while you were still in high school. And then you could go to like the equivalent of like a 2-year college or a 4-year college. But once you finish high school, you could start to work in the company and get paid and work right next to the engineers to grow your skills. And then they took the model and they shared it with the public, to the world, and say, take this, replicate this all over America. So in that example, what I'm saying is that IBM was a little visionary because they were saying, you know what, we can sit here and twist our arms and say we can't find Black engineers, we can't find women engineers, or we can say, well, we're not being very successful at finding them. And until we do, we're going to create some of our own. We're going to build people and empower them. So a lot of this has to do with what is your mindset about what it is you're trying to accomplish.
I love that. That's very important too. And especially when it comes to those entry level positions, most of the time you're getting straight out of high school and you're doing that first year internship. There isn't a whole lot of difference typically. The GPAs are about the same. The work experience is 0 for most cases. And why not? If you're leaning towards one or the other and you don't have any statistics or anything, that data that's driving you to that decision. And if your goal is to eventually have a diverse workforce, and why not start with the minority candidate? Why not do that for the diversity candidate?
That's right. Yesterday, I was looking at a job description for a person who is going to review the bills that go to benefits managers and companies. So when the benefits managers have a problem or they say that something isn't correct or they're having some issue, this is the person that they're going to talk to on the phone. And I looked at the job description. Everything was coming along. And then at the very bottom, it says requirements and it says bachelor's degree. And I was looking at them thinking, what's the degree for? What do they need this degree for? We get into the habit of creating these things to separate people, to differentiate people. But first of all, you're just shooting yourself in the foot because the person who has a degree might want a different kind of job. And here you have a job that doesn't require a degree, but you're saying it does based on nothing, just arbitrary. And people then, who come to interview for this job, the first thing that they understand is that you don't feel they're good enough because they don't have a degree. So why not take that off there and say, what are the skills actually required to perform in the job, what they call skills-based hiring, and say, does the person have those skills? Try to evaluate that. I'll tell you another thing that I know for a fact based on my training, and I recently did a seminar on this with another organization. And that is, we were talking to a group of HR leaders, and only about 30-something% of the people we talked to in these big companies were training their managers how to interview, right? We're doing what we call structured interviewing. Instead, to this day, in big companies and small, people are letting managers bring candidates in or talk to them on Zoom or whatever, and they're sitting there and just asking them random questions. You got 3 people to interview, you ask 3 people 3 different sets of questions, and then at the end, you pick somebody. Guess what? You're going to pick the person that you feel most comfortable with. That's it, every time. That's what bias is. It's not meaning that you are trying to do a bad thing. It's your brain. It's going to just automatically guide you to the person with whom you just felt most comfortable. Maybe they play golf, maybe they play tennis, basketball, whatever it is your thing is, that little thing. And you cannot explain to the other 2 people why they did not get the job. So it's really important to understand what it is you're looking for in order to make good judgments.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's definitely important with that. And I think too, just holding managers, for the most part, no matter how big the company is, at the end of the day, the one that's going to do the ground level interview is going to be the actual person that they're going to be working with. It's going to be their senior, their manager. Maybe HR might do the initial screening, but I also think there needs to be accountability with those hiring. Did you consider diversity applicants? And even ask, do you want to consider diversity applicants? That way it puts it on the radar for that standpoint. That brings up the point of having the conversation. I think diversity a lot of times in corporate environments, it's very taboo. It's an uncomfortable conversation. It's awkward. It's, stepping on toes. How do you make this more of a conversation that is required to happen?
And so because I agree with you, Susanne, and because I know that for a fact, and because I was a fake, a fraud, and a phony, and for all my years in corporate, never talked about it myself, I know how hard it is. And that's actually why my book is designed in a particular way where I tell a lot of real truths. But what I'm more focused on is getting people to hear the truth so they can do something with it. And so that means that to get these conversations going, it's probably a little unfair because in order for me to have this conversation, I have to put the person I'm talking to, I can't put them on the defensive. I have to make them comfortable so they can have this conversation and hear the message. If all I'm doing is pointing out the mistakes or saying, why are you wrong? Or how come you didn't do that? They're going to react just like everybody else reacts when they feel attacked. So there's this piece about, first of all, leaders have to say, we're going to talk about this. And secondly, then you have to make it possible that when people bring the issues up, you have to hear what they have to say and do something about it. So all of you who might do employee surveys and focus groups and so on, don't do those if you're not going to implement the ideas that the employees requested in those surveys. And by the way, you might not even always need a survey if you can find a way to ask the managers, are you talking to your employees? I value managers talking to employees more than I value surveys and focus groups. Obviously, in big groups, you can't do that. But if you can't make eye contact with me, how can you manage me? So you better get up there and talk to your employees. And then the other thing is, I wrote recently, and it's in the book, there's these 5 taboo topics. There's race, religion, sex, money, and race. Like who created the rules? I don't know, but those are the rules. And so, but what I've been saying is that race and money are 2 things we must talk about. So we talked about race a little bit just now and ethnicity. And this could also include LGBTQ plus status and all the other ways that people vary because human variation is normal. My point is, we've got to get rid of the taboo about people talking about what their uniqueness is that needs support. So there's that. But the other thing we have to talk about is money. And Susanne, you know all about money. But here's another whole world that is only recently being explored, which is that we have never had pay transparency. We've always had pay gaps by race, by whatever the variations are. Women are less than men. Hispanic people in America earn less than white people in America, and Black people are always at the bottom. All of that stuff is real. It's in the data. So if we don't talk about money, how do we ever solve for real equity? I have a thing that I've started to say over the couple of years as I have really bothers me about this. And so now I say, Susanne, here's what I want from you. Put me in and show me the money. What does that mean? When I come to work for you, okay, you've hired me. Now, make sure that you're training me, developing me, and giving me the access to the other opportunities there are in this organization. If you're not doing that, I'm gone. And then show me the money. You better make sure you're paying me fairly because somewhere or another, I'm going to figure this out. And either I'm going to figure it out by comparing myself to people inside or people outside. If I compare myself to people outside, I discover, wait a minute, I'm not going to stay for that either. You got to put me in and show me the money. The 2 things go together from an equity perspective.
Oh, yeah. And we're talking about millennials, they sit there and go, how much you made? What's your raise last year?
Yes.
And they put it on the internet too. Trynd.com,
Yes, they do. They do. And, I'm not part of that generation, so that feels very weird. But I have to tell you, it was only when they started doing this that now we got to a point in time where in the state of California, they passed a law that effective January 1, they have to start disclosing pay ranges. And now for the first time, people will know you're paid $2 an hour. Wait a minute. The pay range goes from $2 an hour to $10 an hour. That means you're at the very, very bottom. And yet you came here with experience. People
and
will
you're training the one that just started.
Exactly. And they're getting paid more than you. So this stuff is real. It's not about just talk. And I'm optimistic because transparency about what we talk about, how we pay people, is the only way that we can get past this notion that only a certain people have the power and know what's going on.
Definitely with that. Now, I see in part 4, you talk about action. It won't be easy, but it can be done. And this one is not necessarily about race, but it says seeing all women clearly.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that. Tell us about the challenges of hiring in diversity, even amongst, just sexes, right? Because women, we tend to have a different responsibility as men. And how do we include people that have different needs?
Yeah. So, I think the very first thing is this awareness that this is true, that women and men don't have the same experience in the workplace. That's just a fact. And I know that not everybody believes it, but that's the truth. Okay, so let's just start there. I do believe that leaders need to also realize, and again, even in the smallest business, you have to realize that employees have certain things that they need to take care of. I was a divorced single parent of a child who needed some special things. And I never talked about what I was doing at home because I was so worried that somebody would judge that I couldn't do the job, or I used to have to leave work every day by a certain time to get to daycare when she was small. And every time I felt like I was sneaking out of the office just to get into my car and go get her to daycare from daycare before they closed so that that person could go home and take care of their family. I remember all of those behaviors. But I also remember that there was a head of that division that used to say, I like looking out into the parking lot and seeing all the cars at 7 o'clock. That lets me know that people are working hard. And what I knew it meant was that because I had to leave by a certain time, I was never going to be in that group of people that he thought were the high performers or high achievers, because they would hang around after work. And then when they finished work, they would then hang around some more in the courtyard and talk to one another. And sometimes they would go out to a bar or something after that. I couldn't do any of those things. And that was because I was a divorced single mother of a small child at the time. But that's just an example. And I think most people are starting to realize that people come to you, you've got to learn something about your employees. You have to know what they deal like. I don't mean to pry. They will tell you what they want to tell you, but you have to account for the fact that just because you have a lifestyle where you go home and somebody provides your meal, or you don't have any other responsibilities, that's not how most people live, especially not women. And then the last thing I'll say about women is that the other thing that has happened with women a lot is that some men have said that they are sort of afraid of us, like they want to avoid us because they think that they might say something wrong or do something wrong. And so they want to avoid us. And I just want to say to people, look, the people that I have known in my life who are the hardiest, who were the most persistent, who were the ones that were bound and determined to get something done were the women in my family, right? They were in no way weak, nor were they looking for anybody else to blame for anything. They're just doing, what they need to do. So some of these ideas hold people back from supporting women when, in fact, the women are likely to be the ones that can be the biggest contributors to whatever they want to accomplish.
Oh yeah, definitely. And there are other ways that that in a day is that she get her work done, right? Maybe she's
Yes.
more efficient than the guy that's there till
Yes.
7 and goes out for the drinks in the
Yes.
evening.
That's right. Yeah. In fact, I told that story and I could see it as clear as day. I could see the parking lot. I could see the boss. I could see myself kind of like sneaking out of my office and locking my door. I could see myself going down the hallway and getting into my car and then tense to have barely enough time to get to the daycare. Like all of that is imprinted in my brain. And I know other people go through this every day,
Oh
every
yeah,
single day.
it's PTSD. I mean, how can you be, how do you continue to survive every day under that stress of I
Yeah,
have to sneak to go pick up my child
that's right.
so they don't get put left on the street,
That's right.
it adds stress versus being an open environment. These are my
Yeah.
expectations. You get it done. If you need to work the weekend, you figure it out, but this is your responsibility. This is what
Mhm.
everybody else is getting done. And this is your SLA, your service
That's
level
right.
agreement. Get it done.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
It goes back to what do we call that? The Parkinson's law. We use as much resources as you give us to get
That's
it
right.
done. So if somebody has till 7, they'll work till 7.
Did you hear about, I don't know if you heard about this, but there's this big experiment going on in the United Kingdom where I can't remember the name of the organization, so I won't quote it because I might be wrong. But basically, what is happening is that companies are signing up to do this experiment where they're allowing their employees to work like a 4-day work week. So, what employees are agreeing to do is they'd work 4 days a week, they'd still produce the same amount. The employees are agreeing that just because I work 1 day less, I'm still producing the same amount. And the employers are saying, well, if you can show me that, let's give it an experiment. Well, they did this. And what they've discovered is that the employees are more satisfied and they're happier, but they're also healthier because they're eating differently and they're exercising more. But from the business side, what they have discovered is that about 80 something percent of the companies that are doing this said they're going to continue it because what they have discovered, and this is the magic, is the employees are being more productive. They're being more productive than then they were working 5 days a week. Because this is just a mentality that has been there forever since the start of the Industrial Revolution that you work 5 days or even 6 days. And what the data is going to come out from this study, I mean, it's already the preliminary data that makes it absolutely clear that the notion of the 5-day work week is not the only way to get this work done, and that employees are much better off and the organizations are so much better off. So it's related to what you just said, because what people really wanted was to have a little bit more time so that they could have 1 day to take the children to a playground or whatever the thing was that they wanted to do. And once they got that, they were good. So employers and leaders have to be willing to think about alternative ways of doing things.
I love that, Dr. Cox. And I'm bad. I'm going to my profit first mind. Let's give them more work to do.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It all depends on, there's something when I was measuring employee opinions at the start of the pandemic, when the companies shut down, And employers were like, oh my gosh, our businesses are going to go to heck because we're not going to have people working. They're going to be home, I don't know, watching TV and eating donuts or something. And in that data, it was absolutely clear that what happened was people went home. I mean, it was not always well organized because it was very stressful, because it wasn't planned, but people were being more productive in those situations. So I think there's a lot of data that suggests that what is more important is to figure out what it is you need to get done. And then say to Gina, you know what, Gina, or find a way to let Gina know, I believed in you. I know you can do this. If you have a problem, you let me know what it is. Other than that, I expect this to be done. And then you just, periodically check in and we make adjustments or whatever, but I will get it done. And not only that, I'll have a smile.
I love that. So really communicating the outcome and what the results are and having the employee kind of navigate the responsibility of how to get it done.
But you have got to be the kind of person that makes it okay to have an open door for me to say, you know what, Susanne, I'm really having a problem, or I really need some help. Because if you do that, but you don't create the two-way conversation opportunity, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot and you're not going to get what you want.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And the demographics are changing. The reality is there are a lot of mothers out there that are single mothers. And I'll tell you, single mothers are some of the hardest working people, not even women, people I've ever
That's right.
seen, because it's survival. They want that job. They want to succeed. They want to get promoted. They want to make more. And so they're willing to do more with that. So you don't want to lose that demographic because you make them feel ashamed for having to run a daycare.
Yeah. Well, what I say in the book and what organizational research has shown is that what you really need to make sure, number one, of course, is that the managers are treating the women as fairly or equally to how they're treating the men. There's that. But the other thing that often helps with women and with people who feel like they're sort of marginalized is, make sure they have a mentor, somebody that can help, that they can go to, because sometimes the boss is the last person who's going to be their mentor. So encourage them to find a mentor outside of that formal, hierarchy. But it is also important, especially for women, that people sponsor them. And all sponsorship means, and managers can be sponsors too, but what sponsorship really means is that managers and leaders should be looking for the talent. And so if you know that Gina reports to Susanne, and Susanne doesn't seem to be doing anything for Gina, you kind of have to look around Susanne and see Paul over there and say, Paul, I want to let you know about this woman, Gina, that I know over here. She's doing this. And I just think about her if you ever have another opportunity, because I think she's got some capabilities. So my point is that sponsorship is somebody who is willing to say your name, even when you're not in a room, to make it possible for you to get a little crack, a little opening. That's all you might sometimes need, where then somebody invites you to a meeting or tells you about a call or says, would you like to read this book? I've had people do that for me where it seems like it's out of the blue, but it really is because they're trying to help me. And this is the only way they can do it, especially if my manager isn't doing it.
Oh, yeah. And when you combine that with what you shared, Dr. Cox, about just human nature is to overlook people that are different, right?
Yeah,
and gravitate to those who are like you. The theory of sponsorship becomes even more important, right? Having that person that is going to say, hey, there's an opportunity over here and this person did something similar and I think they'll do very well. On this particular job, I know when I was with Anderson, we had a mentor and my mentor would pull me on his jobs, and suddenly I was on all his clients, and so I got to have experiences that some other people may not have gotten because my mentor was an advocate that, I want you to get a bit of securitizations here. I want you to see some derivatives here and have that experience that people didn't even know what those words meant. And so it's important, like, just like you said, is realize there's a bias there. And so mentorship in combination of sponsorship becomes really important.
Yeah, because sometimes you don't even realize your own capabilities. So the other reason why mentors and sponsors are necessary for anybody is that sometimes you just don't even know what you could do. And it takes somebody else sometimes to reflect it back to you and show you. And so that's, I think, why organizations that are what I call continuous learning, they're really looking to help people to just keep growing and growing. That's a really valuable way to grow a business. So if you have a one-person business, if you have a two-person business, you know what? You do not have to have all the answers. If you've hired this person and they're starting out and they're hungry, they want to learn, let them learn. It doesn't threaten you. It just gives them more opportunity to contribute to your business. And then if you can, you may not always be able to give them more money, but you might be able to give them some more responsibility or visibility. People don't always need more money. But what they always need is more respect and recognition for what they can do.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, especially if you're in that age group, those millennials, Gen Zs coming up now, they want the experience, right? They want to be stretched and they want to be exposed to different things. So give it to them, increase their productivity and stretch them a little bit. That's going to be a good thing. Now, Dr. Cox, you have shared so much juicy information. It's been such an amazing podcast episode and sharing your juicy morsels. One of the things I like to ask before we close out is, if you can leave our viewers and our listeners with one piece of advice, what would that advice be?
Yeah, that piece of advice would be approach everything you do in business as if the only thing that matters is the relationship that you have with the person right in front of you or that will be right in front of you. So while you're busy worrying about your strategy and your growth and all of that, which you do also have to worry about, think about the fact that there's such a significant advantage that you can get from just dealing one-on-one with people in a way that makes them feel respected and valued. That person could be a customer, it could be an employee, it could be somebody who's a supplier, it could be any person will turn around. And when they go home and think about who are the people that they met that day that made them feel like they were seen and heard, if it's you, they're going to remember that. They're going to look for a way to pay that back. You don't even have to ask them sometimes. So that's the most valuable thing a person can do to sort of secure their future, is to really care about the other humans they interact with.
I love that. Yeah. And Dr. Cox, what's the best way to reach out to you to find out more, to learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Gina with an E. Don't ask me why. So my website is GenaCox.com. And if you go to my website, you can learn more about me, you can learn more about my work, and learn more about the book, and reach out to me. I respond to everyone who reaches out to me with questions. And I love nothing more than opportunities to help coach leaders to be their fantastic, fabulous selves, to achieve everything they want to achieve.
I love that. And what I'm going to do for you guys that are driving and may not have your hands available, I'm going to put Gina's information in the show notes. You'll be able to go to her website, order her amazing book that is coming out this Tuesday. I've already pre-ordered my copy and I'm so excited about it. And definitely check out Dr. Cox's book, Leading Inclusion. You don't want to miss it. Lots of great juicy nuggets that will definitely challenge the status quo and get you on the road of retention and increasing your talent pool, which is what we all need to increase profits.
It's been such a pleasure to be with you. And this is one of those, I can tell when I'm with someone who really enjoys talking to people because it feels like a conversation. And that's exactly what this feels like. So thank you so much, Susanne, for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Cox, for sharing your wealth of knowledge.